Dr. Weisburd, whenever we talk about particular approaches to policing, especially concentrating on a place, there's always fear that you're just pushing down and it'll splurt out and the crime will be displaced to other places in the neighborhood. Is that true in your view? Is that what you see in these studies?
Well, this is sort of the boogeyman of place-based crime prevention in my view. And it goes back to a view that was very prominent in the 1970s that the police could not concentrate resources because if they did, the people would just move to the places where the resources weren't located. The idea somehow was that if the police pushed down, crime would just pop up elsewhere, a sort of balloon model. And not only that, the criminals would know where they are, etc. And so there was a view at that time we need to spread patrol unevenly. The Kansas City Preventive Patrol Experiment and other studies at the time suggested that just wasn't working. Now the question becomes, what happens when you focus in on a crime hotspot and you achieve some effectiveness there? Well, what happens to crime? What happens in the areas around, etc.? As a police officer in Minneapolis said to me when I was riding in his car in a very critical way, he says, "Don't you know the crime is just going to move around the corner?" So this question of crime moving around the corner is very, very important. Now the empirical evidence suggests that's just not the case. Okay? A series of studies now show that when you focus in crime prevention at hotspots, you don't just move the crime to the immediate areas around. Now here's just, let me tell you about this study because it's important because it not only shows that empirical evidence, it also provides some explanations for why this happens. The empirical evidence so far is that when you push down hotspots, you don't get an increase in crime nearby. In fact, you get a decrease. And Ron Clark and I have coined the term the diffusion of crime control benefits. If you focus in on hotspots, you get a diffusion of crime control benefits around. Let me tell you about this study because I think it's interesting. And again, it's an NIJ study, I think a rather brave one, and also a brave one for the city that participated. Jersey City. Because what I proposed to them was, let's do a crime prevention program in which we're not interested whether the crime prevention is effective. We're only going to use approaches that everybody knows are effective, that have been proved in prior studies to be effective. Let's do that. And the real interest here, imagine telling a police chief this, the real interest here is I want to see whether crime moves to the other areas nearby. Okay? Now, fortunately, there was a chief I worked with a number of years, and he looked at me and says, "Of course, David, we want to know whether this is having a real effect. I don't want to just keep coming here and go next door the next week." So we designed a study in which the whole study was designed to create tremendous crime prevention activities at a target area. You saw it earlier, that orange area in the Jersey City study of a group of blocks together. And then we wanted to see what happened. Did the crime move to the areas nearby? We chose those areas nearby, so we didn't choose an area where there was a river, so you'd have to cross the river to have displacement. We were very careful about how we chose it. Now this is just one slide from a whole series of slides that tells the story. The story is what the other empirical evidence shows. The blue line is the target area. As you can see, lots of prostitution. This is based on systematic social observations, thousands of them, I should note. In the target area, the intervention comes, the line there on your screen, first line, and then things go down. With the other studies, not a surprise when you bring in 10 new cops, all kinds of new crime prevention, community, everything went in this target area. So that went down. And it stayed down throughout the intervention period, and even towards the end, though, it looks like it might be going up a little bit after the intervention period. Now, what's interesting, though, is the red line is the first catchment area. That's one block out from that target area. And you can see what you'd expect if the displacement hypothesis was correct would be the crime would go up in this thing. It didn't do that. It followed the same pattern almost exactly. And if you look at the green line as well, though there was less prostitution activities as well, that's 2 blocks out. Quite a large way, 2 blocks out from a target area like the one we looked at earlier. Now, in this study, we were fortunate in that we had both qualitative data collection in terms of interviews with offenders and also an ethnographer that worked completely independently of the rest of the project. Whereas I hired someone, I said, go out there, do what you do, talk to me in a year and a half. The only communication we had was if there was going to be a major police crackdown, we didn't want their ethnographers being picked up, so we would warn them a bit. It was a safety issue that we had to follow. Now, just to start out with a little bit of theory, if you don't mind, in this kind of idea, if crime is concentrated in certain places, the next question is why? And the reason why is there are special opportunities at those places. In our juvenile crime study, for example, we found that those 86 places, where were they? As you know where they were. They were malls, they were restaurants, they were not bars. This was underage people. They were not bars. In other crime studies, bars always show up prominently. Well, because those are the activity spaces that juveniles hang out with. If you want to, robbers, so to speak, are going to look for good opportunities for that, maybe around a subway station or a bus stop. Crime cannot, one of the fallacies, there are two fallacies of the previous way of thinking about crime in my view. One, I think, is the Dracula model. Offenders are like after blood and they have to have it, True Blood on television, whatever, and they're going after them. Nothing you can do about it. They're totally involved. A lot of people who commit crime are not that involved. Most people that are arrested once are never arrested again. Much of the crime problem is committed by people who aren't that committed. And even people who are committed still have to make food every day. Sometimes they have children. They have to take the daycare. There's a study in Israel that shows that women offenders take their kids to daycare when they go out and offend. So lots of going on for these people. They're not as motivated as you want. The second is that crime opportunities exist everywhere. Crime could just move anywhere. A prostitution market is not going to move onto a street with 500 door people, 10,000 people living on it, right next to the police precinct. Okay, that's not going to be a good place. They're going to look for certain sorts of opportunities. Quite often prostitution markets, for example, in places where there aren't many people who can call the police. They're in places where there's an abandoned lot or an abandoned building where you can carry out your activity. The idea that these crime opportunities are unlimited is wrong. There may be more than a few, but unlimited is certainly the wrong way to view it. A drug market needs a certain type of place where people can get in and out. Quite often they're places that are safe to get to because people from the suburbs coming in don't want to get killed every time they happen to buy drugs. So there are all kinds of components that make a place, a specific place, a good place to carry out a certain type of criminal activity. Now, in this study, we asked the question, so why is it that these offenders did not just displace? What's going on here? What happened? Okay. So one of the things we did is we asked people through these interviews, like why, what's going on, why aren't you moving, etc. Try not to ask leading questions. And we got answers like this. One of the answers was, well, look, if I have to move, I have to reestablish my knowledge of the area. I have to reestablish my clients. There's a lot of work to be done. This sounds like a regular work, and I think, by the way, that one of the mistakes we make is thinking of offenders as very different from ourselves. Offenders make decisions often just like we do, maybe not with the same level of rationality or knowledge, etc., but they are making decisions in many ways the way all of us make decisions. So one problem is, if I move, I have to reestablish things. I have to tell people, customers, others. The other thing is, if I move, I go to an area, I don't know it. I don't know who's going to call the police and who won't call the police. What a tremendously important idea, right? If you know who's not going to go to the police, you just carry on the activity while they're there. The opposite of this, is, by the way, is in the 1980s when the New York City Police Department was moving cops from precinct to precinct to keep them from getting corrupt. They forgot that the cops who went into the area didn't know anyone, so they'd go and beat some, stop someone, etc. that's been there for a year, an old guy who just acts a little unusual because they didn't know the area. In the same way, offenders, familiarity of the area, knowledge is very important for issues of safety, issues of carrying out the activities they want to carry out. There's also the question of danger. If you're in a market, especially, if you go to another market, they may not want you there. One person said, a person would ask, why don't you just move over 4 blocks away? There's another drug market, plenty of customers. He said, if I go over there, they're going to kill me. I mean, you just can't move. It's not that simple. There are other sorts of dangers besides the police calling. Now, finally, in a sort of very human way, one of the prostitutes, when asked by an interviewer why did it move to another spot, did not mention those issues. She simply said, I don't feel comfortable there. Those are not my type of girls. Now, that really says to me the nature of which offenders are making these sorts of decisions. We think it's easy to move where you offend. Is it easy to move where you live? Familiarity of place is a very important component of our lives. It's not easy to change.